Shalom, shalom, everybody. Ariel Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, found online at www.KosherTorah.com. We are going to continue tonight in a series of lessons on the topic of the classical Kabbalah, based upon a 1559 text called Ohel Moed, the sanctuary, written by a Rabbi Yosef Menachem in old Egypt. And right about that time, probably Isaac Luria himself was living there. So I don't know if anyone had any contact, but that's the time and the place of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the original ideas of the Kabbalah prior to they becoming more solidified in the forms of Moshe Cordovero, and then, of course, after that, by the Ariel, Isaac Luria, and, of course, Chaim Vital. Now, why is this important? Who cares? Well, when you want to deal with ideas, remember what ideas are supposed to be. They're supposed to be fluid, moving. The Torah is always compared to water. Have any of you ever been on a boat in the water? You're going up and down, up and down. If you're in the ocean, you're going up and down. That is what, or we call, like the Talmud, for example, the Torah, we call it the Yam, the ocean. Because just as it is compared to depth, it's also compared to movement, fluidity. And indeed, there is modern scientific ideas that believes that the oceans of our planet itself, should I call it an it, are alive. Yeah, even modern science understands the concept of what we in Torah call the Shekhinah. Others in the New Age community called Gaia, or Mother Earth, that the entire planet is alive. And the waters are alive. Now, who cares? Well, being that water, which is kind of like alive, makes up 80% of our physical bodies. It's alive too. So yeah, and therefore to properly refer to Torah, it's good to refer to Torah as something that is actually alive and moving. Now, again, this becomes very, very important for the topic of tonight's discussion. Lesson 3 in our series, the Ohel Moed, right in the beginning. And he discusses this in a section which he calls Sod Mufla Mimcha, Bit Mufla Mimcha Al Tidrosh. That which is above you, don't elaborate. And he opens up with a discussion which is very relevant to us today of the big fight, and it is a fight, technically a war, between philosophy and what we call mysticism. Now, we got to put things into a context. Remember, when we want to use a term like mysticism, let's put all this BS aside and say, well, what is mysticism? Answer: experiencing what we call the spiritual dimensions personally. You know, there are spiritual realms, right? The realms of the angels. If you go into later codified Kabbalah, Chaim Vital stuff, you know we have the worlds of Atzilut and Beri'ah and Yitzirah and Asiyah, and we have all the Hechalot. We have this nice roadmap, if you will, this diagram of this is here and that is there, etc. We're pretty much sure that we got it, under our thumb. We know what it is, right? That's a dramatic pause for you to think, right? No. Let me just tell you this. Knowledge. Remember, knowledge in the Torah, knowledge is experiential, not academic. And that is why the word for knowledge, dot, is the same word and usage as sexual intercourse. Like it says in Genesis, and Adam knew his wife Eve. What do you mean he knew her? Like they live next door to each other, and like you got her phone number. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, she lives next door. No. Knowledge is always experiential. And therefore, if you do not experience something, you can't really be said to know it. So, philosophy takes a very, very different point of view. Philosophy is the discussion of ideas and the acceptance of truth based upon the logic of those ideas. I use that word truth. Should I speak of truth with a capital T, objective truth, or with a small case t, subjective truth? See where this is going now? Here, let's get interesting. As you know, I am a rabbi, and I represent the Jewish faith. What did I just call it? Faith. Faith is something we believe in. Now, you all know that the Jewish faith is the true faith, and it's very easy to prove, right? Again, a dramatic pause, because I'm sure that our Christian audience, our Muslim audience, or Hindu and Buddhist audience are going to shake their head and go, no. If I was sitting here with an evangelical Christian or any other Christian of any other denomination, and I was to say, is your faith the true faith? They would say, but of course. To which I could say from my rationalist philosophical point of view, prove it. And of course, they would bring proof texts which would, in their own eyes, validate what they believe. Isn't that always the case? Believers will believe what they want and accept those beliefs as being the appropriate rational proof, to therefore take the subjective value of their beliefs and to transform it into the objective reality of the universe. That's pretty much what everybody does. And that is why it is important for us to be able to recognize what we're dealing with here. Philosophy deals with those things which we speculate and cannot at present be proven. Example, God. How many of you can prove to me that God exists? I can't prove that. I can't prove that at all. Neither can you. Christians, for example, and this is foundation to Christianity, will point to what they believe to be the miracles of Yeshu and say that is proof that he is God. But if you subject that idea to a rational analysis, you'd see that it just doesn't add up, right? Let's say, for example, a truth. Let's accept a Christian doctrine as truth and say that Yeshu actually died and was resurrected. Okay, let's just say for argument's sake that happened. How does that prove that he's God? Who else could do that other than God? Well, I don't know that, neither do you. It could have been extraterrestrial technology. It could be something else, somehow, somewhere. We don't know. And therefore, if you accept that correlation, you do so as an example of faith. But that's not proof. Here's some other interesting ones. One of the big ones today, as you know probably, in the last, I think, 10 years, the flat earthers, yeah, the flat earthers, they have come back and they got all the proofs that the world is flat. All right, as we would say in Yiddish, a gesundheit to them, good luck. Now, if any are of the Orthodox Jewish faith, they can point to matters in Jewish religious literature that indicates a belief in the flat earth. And you want to know something? You might not like it, but what they said is true. The rabbis of the day, based upon the understanding of astronomy in the day, pretty much believed in a flat earth because their science didn't know any better. But now here is the issue. When we read the words of our rabbis, and they postulate, and they speculate, and they wish to offer their opinions on things outside of Torah, are their words divinely inspired, authoritative prophecy, and whatever they say we have to follow and obey no matter what because it's objective truth? Now there are those today who say yes. However, that attitude contradicts pretty much the vast majority of ideas, beliefs, opinions, and views of rabbis since the beginning of the time when we had rabbis. Rabbis aren't like that. Indeed, you find in the Talmud where the rabbis will say, the rabbis of Israel have said this, and the scientists of the nations have said that, and the rabbis concede that the scientists of the nations are correct. You see, that was the great thing that I love about our sages. They were open to discussion because they recognized the fluid nature of the Torah. It wasn't codified. It wasn't black and white. It wasn't either or. And indeed, for those of you who know a little bit of history, the Mishnah, which is the codification of the oral Torah as we have it today, was codified by Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, ballpark around the year 170 of the Common Era. And it was a big deal. They didn't want to put it into writing. And they only did it out of desperation. So you say, what's the big deal? It's a book. They were afraid that if you wrote down the laws, people would interpret them to be black and white. And that's it. And that was dangerous because things are not black and white. And that is why whenever you read the Mishnah, you'll find Rabbi Yehuda will bring down Halakha, and then I'll say, but then there's the second opinion, and then there is this third opinion. And in significant things, those opinions were not only represented as ideas in abstract, but as representation of actual practice. So for example, there was a discussion in Talmudic times. We're talking ballpark around the 2nd century or so. Now, we all know that the Torah says you shall not eat a kid boiled in its mother's milk. Lo tefeshel gedi b'chalev imo. And it's written 3 times. Now, why? First of all, what does it all mean? Well, our rabbis bring down a tradition which they believe has come down to us literally as an oral tradition from the days of Moses. Is there any proof that has come down to us? Have we found any archaeological writings from Solomon and the first temple? No. This is what our sages say. So we are rabbinic Jews. We walk in their footsteps. This is what they say, and this is what we embrace and accept. Got it? Got it. So, the rabbis say that when it says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev bimo, you don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, means it's written 3 times in the Torah. If it's something that's repeated 3 times, it probably has significance. So they say 1 time, it means that you don't cook the 2 together. 2nd time is that you don't eat anything that of those 2 which have been cooked together. And the 3rd time to indicate that you don't even benefit from the mixture of these 2. Okay, fine. That's why it's written. That's how we accept it. Now, what exactly is meat? Animal, no. Okay. Well, an animal, as you know, in order to be considered kosher, we have to slaughter it. We have to slit its throat, let the blood out. We have to extract and check the organs to make sure they're right and proper, and then soak and salt the meat so it becomes kosher. Okay. Now, about chicken? It says you don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. Does that apply to chicken? What do you think? I don't know. Some of you out there I know actually raise chickens. How many of you have like chicken milk? Do you have chicken milk? I mean, I have chocolate milk, almond milk, soy milk, cow's milk. I've even seen oat milk. I haven't seen chicken milk. Can anybody get me like chicken milk? Obviously, you know their chickens don't have milk. So therefore, why on earth would we consider a chicken to be meat? Right? It says you don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. Chicken don't have milk, so therefore they shouldn't be considered meat. But the rabbis, remember that fluidity of Torah? They said, you know something? Let's consider this. Like meat, you have to take the chicken and slaughter it. Drain its blood, like meat. Like meat, you have to check the chicken, soak and salt it, and everything else. And if we allow those who, will, eat chicken, and if you're going to slaughter it and soak and salt it and the like, and eat it with dairy, don't you think people might make the mistake to think that if I could eat chicken with dairy and I have to, slaughter it and kosher, make it kosher, then I could do the same thing with the meat? No, and therefore come into a violation of the biblical law. So the rabbis said, you know something? Let's create a rabbinic law and just throw chicken into the meat mix, even though chicken has no milk, right? And we're going to say, just because the chicken has to be slaughtered and it has to be properly koshered, so we're going to make it to be just like meat, and you don't eat it with dairy. And that is what the Mishnah has stated, and that is the observance of Jewish law to this very day. Dramatic pause. I see here in text, people are already ahead of me. Fine, you already know that not everybody in the day of Rabbi Yehuda accepted that view. One of the great rabbis of the day, a Rabbi Yossi of the Galilee, he said, you know what? In my community, we enjoy chicken parmesan. We eat chicken with dairy all the time, and all due respect to Rabbi Yehuda, and kudos to him, and the debate that we're going to continue. And for all the days of Rabbi Yossi, they continued to eat dairy with chicken. And when he passed away, then that community eventually absorbed into the greater community, and that no longer is the case of observance today. But this is the practice. Why is this important? Well, here we are today, and we do not eat chicken as meat. Okay, so, we do eat chicken as meat. We do not eat chicken as dairy. Got me on that one. Okay, so now here's a question. How much time do we wait between eating meat and dairy? Well, the rabbis were asked that question too. And they said, well, now here, I'm going to open up a can of worms here. First of all, the original edict was that you could not eat meat and dairy that was cooked together. You got that now? Cooked together. What would happen if you had meat and dairy that was not cooked together? The rabbis, well, they said the Torah never prohibited that. But the rabbi said, you know something, whether it's cooked together or not cooked together, again, we have to be careful. We have to be shepherds for the people who aren't themselves careful with these things. Just look around today. People cut corners and they cheat. All right? And they do all this kinds of stuff all the time. So, it says Ashkenazi ways to soak a chicken meat in the milk. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. If you can find soaking your chicken in chicken milk, you let me know. I don't want any crazies out there. But anyway, getting back to the business here. According to biblical law, the only time meat and dairy become prohibited is when they are cooked together. So technically, according to biblical law, the word cooked together, it's not prohibited. But the rabbis said, it's kind of dangerous stuff. People are going to make mistakes. So let's prohibit all combinations of meat and dairy, whether or how they were cooked or not cooked together. Rabbi said, fine. So we're not going to eat meat and dairy together, no matter how or what the combination. Got it. Now what? Well, okay, if I can't eat them together, how long do I have to wait between one and the other? The rabbi said, pretty much from one meal to the next. You'll find that's what the Talmud says. So, you can't eat meat and dairy together in the same meal. But you can eat them from one meal to the next. So, how long is the wait between one meal and the next? This is where all the opinions come down. You see, technically speaking, a meal is defined by its blessings before and after. A meal is concluded with grace after meals, and a meal begins with the opening baracha. If it's on bread, hamutzi, or shahakol, or whatever. Now, if I say my grace after meals, birkat hamazon, and from the side of stringency, I wash out my mouth, can I not technically wash my hands again, say hamotzi, and begin my second meal within a minute? Theoretically, yes, you can. And that is the law. So then, if that's the case, why then do we have this extreme period of waiting between meat and dairy? Well, you can look into older opinions. You can look at the opinion of one rabbi who said, well, how long do we wait? And he said the answer from the Talmud, from one meal to the next. How long is that? Well, he said approximately 6 hours. In our country, in our day, between lunch and dinner, it's about 6 hours. So, in Hebrew, that was K Sheshaot, approximately 6 hours. Well, that little K, which means approximately, got erased over the years, and it got regimented into 6 hours. And to this very day, the vast majority of Orthodox Jews will accept that and accept 6 hours as the differentiation between eating meat to dairy. Now, not all opinions were like that. You can find an opinion in the Zohar, which is Kabbalah, which states that 1 hour is sufficient between eating meat and dairy. And according to the Zohar, that only waited an hour. But the Zohar is also strict. Normally, in religious, in orthodoxy, you can eat meat after dairy, but you can't eat dairy after meat. I'm not going to get into the details as to why. But according to the Zohar, which offers an astrological reason for this, you can't do either. Now, you can go into the time of the Arizal, which is, oh my goodness, how many centuries and centuries, millennia after this rabbinic discussion. And that ask him, how long do you wait? And he says, the day I eat meat, I won't eat dairy. I'll wait 24 hours. Why? Because he believed that was the right way to do things. Okay. I have just given you a lesson in Halakha, Jewish law. Where does this fit into our discussion of rationalism versus mysticism? Very, very important. Where and how? Listen. Excuse me. Did anybody ever stop and think, well, what does God want? If it's written in God's Torah not to eat meat and dairy, why don't we just pray? God will reveal to us through Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration or prophecy, and He'll reveal to us exactly what the right way is. And whatever God says, we do. Amen. Don't you think that would be a smart thing to do? No. The rabbis say that's not the way we do things. When it comes to the practice and observance of Torah, we do not look for or accept divine intervention. Indeed, there's a very, very famous story in the Gemara, tractate Baba Metzia, of a rabbinic discussion between all the rabbis. It was led by the majority is led by Rabbi Yehoshua, and you had Rabbi Eliezer, big brilliant scholar, and they were arguing over really kind of like a small thing, like whether or not a certain type of oven could or could not contract like ritual impurity, and therefore is it kosher or not. Well, Rabbi Eliezer brought all the rational proofs to say it's valid, it's kosher. But again, the sages said, yeah, you got a point there, Rabbi Eliezer, but still, we have to be on guard and concerned for the welfare of the public and be careful of how they can get confused. So even though this oven is kosher, we're not going to allow it. But Rabbi Eliezer said, you got to allow it. And he called upon mystical forces to validate his opinion. He called on the forces of nature which materialized and gave credence to his opinion. The rabbi said, I'm not interested. We got to place attention and emphasis on the needs of the people. And Rabbi Eliezer wasn't going to be silenced. And he said, if God's on my side, let heaven speak. And a voice spoke from heaven. How come you guys are arguing with Rabbi Eliezer when you know the oven's kosher? Rabbi Yehoshua got up because voice from heaven spoke. It's called a bat kol, whether it's the voice of God or an angel, whatever. Voice of heaven, that's a pretty supernatural thing. You pay attention to that. And he quoted the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. And he said, hey, heaven, the Torah, the law of Torah itself states that the Torah is not in heaven. And therefore, being that it's not in your domain, it's in our domain, we have the authority, and we decided accordingly. Sorry. Now, pretty much Rabbi Yehoshua just told heaven to mind its own business with regards to the Torah. You would think what would happen next, thunderbolts and earthquakes, but no. They claim that one of the rabbis who was there, days later, encountered the famous immortal prophet Eliyahu Hanavi. And he says, Eliyahu, good Lord, what was God going to do? Rabbi Yehoshua pretty much just told him to mind his own business with his own Torah. And Eliyahu says, oh, you don't misunderstand. God laughed. And he goes, my sons have defeated me. My sons have defeated me. They're right. The famous psychologist, Erich Fromm, that's the guy who wrote, like The Art of Loving. He wrote in his book, which is commentary on Judaism, Shall Be as Gods, that this is the quintessential story of Torah, which is freedom. Freedom, fluidity, and movement. And that is why mysticism, which seeks to validate objective truth based upon a personal experience, is well and is good and has its vital essential role within the internal workings of the individual. But it is not the way and the path for the public. This is where rationalism versus mysticism comes into big play in modern day Judaism and in our world today, because we're fighting this battle big time in our social cultural war today. Let's explain this, why it's important. All throughout Talmudic times, all throughout biblical times, we have always had experiencers, people who followed the prophetic path and were able to ascend, interact with the higher dimensional planes, and bring back revelation and wisdom and insight from those domains. Always. To this very day, we have those guys. And what? What kind of revelations are they bringing? Well, in the days of the Second Temple, many of what they saw, or let me rephrase that, many who saw what they saw the conflict in the human psyche, saw the wars going on with people, and they brought back their message. There are wars. There is the great war between good and evil, and we are right in the middle of it. And we need to fight the physical war just like we need to fight the spiritual war. And those with that voice radicalized, motivated, and encouraged political violence. These were groups like the Essenes and the Zealots. These are like the prophetic Kabbalists of the day. They were up there. If you remember from the Dead Sea Scrolls, these are the guys who wrote, the War Scroll, the sons of light versus the sons of Belial, and that kind of stuff. And they were ready. They were ready to duke it out because God's on their side. Well, based upon those personal experiences, what we call the mystics, the public believed in them and followed them. Didn't work out too well now, did it? The Essenes fought and died to the last man. We today have a myth, which is really a lie, based upon some cults that developed in Europe in the last century or two, in which the Essenes were this group of love. No, they weren't. They were violent, misogynist, anti-Gentile warriors. A very ruthless, violent group. Our sages did not like them at all. It's kind of like why we don't have that much of a mention of them in our rabbinic tradition. They fought and died. They followed mysticism to its radical point and brought violence in its wake. 1,000 years later, Christians made the same mistake. And in their religious mystical zeal, started the Crusades. Some say it's still being fought to this day. If you look at Islamic terrorism, for the most part now 1,000 years after the Crusades, you know what it's based on? Have you ever actually studied Islamic eschatology, the study of the end times according to Islam? Are you familiar with Al-Mahdi? Are you familiar with what Iran is really all about? They're real believers in the mystical message. They believe that they need a nuclear war to provoke the coming of the Mahdi. That's exactly what they believe, and they're willing to bring the world to war based upon their messianic beliefs. I don't know, baby. That's like dangerous stuff. That kind of mystical danger is what led to the destruction of our temple in Jerusalem with the provocation of the war against Rome. Now, Yeshu, the original and historical Yeshu, he was one of these violent type of guys. And that's clear in the Christian tradition, even though they try to whitewash it over. And this is what happens when you misapply mysticism. Now, mysticism has a very important and vital role. All right? Experiencing. Teach it all the time. That's what we teach here at our KosherTorah school. You might think that I'm teaching against what I'm teaching, but no, I'm not. You see, I recognize the great war that we're up against. I know what it is. I experience it and I see it. Somebody here is asking a very good question. Am I talking about the famous war prophesied in the book of Ezekiel, Gog and Magog? Now, here is the answer. And I wrote about this in my Visions of Daniel book, available on Amazon now. Remember, when you read prophecy in the Bible, it is not literal. When Pharaoh in the days of Joseph had his dreams, it was about cows and corn, nothing to do about years and famine. When Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, it was about statues. All the dreams of Joseph, remember he saw stars and the sun and the moon, they are not literal. It says clearly when God speaks to the prophets, he speaks to them in this symbolic language, all right, in puzzles and dreams. And Ezekiel, the great prophet, had the vision of the war of Gog and Magog. And the commentaries say to this day, we have no idea who Gog and Magog is. We have no idea what this war is going to be. I guess we'll figure it out when the time comes. Smart. Now, this is important. All dreams are symbolic. Is the dream of Gog and Magog a literal war that's going to be fought with like guns and tanks? Is the prophecy in the book of Zechariah, which speaks about the great earthquake ripping open Jerusalem and the Holy Land, is that literal? Symbolic. We are right now fighting the war of Gog and Magog. We are right now fighting the war of Amalek. But now, to digress for just a second about Purim's story. We all remember the Purim story. All right, we tell it. It's in the biblical book of Esther. Time datus this week is the week of Purim. And we know that Haman, I wrote about this in an essay called Amalek Today. You can find it on my YouTube. I put it up there. There's a link to it on my YouTube page, on Facebook, Patreon. It's out there. And I told the story. What really happened. All right? Haman was a very smart guy. He wanted to kill the Jews, but he didn't want to do it himself. He wanted to get the dirty work done by someone else. And therefore he manipulated things and made the story happen. So, how does Mordecai and Esther fight this battle? Did they go into seclusion to fight this war mystically in the heavenly realms? No. Mordecai yelled and screamed in the streets. He provoked Esther to take a chance on her life, and Esther acted with very subtle wisdom. She knew how to get Ahasuerus on her side and to set up Haman, which she did. Long story short, Haman's plan failed, but how then did the Jews handle the war? Did they go into mystical prayer and meditation? No. They had to pick up arms, and they had to fight and win. So you see, mystical experiences have their place. Physical reality has its place. Now, with regards to the religion and observance of Judaism, this topic is very important now. When we have an issue of Jewish law, which is how we're going to observe the practice, do we follow the Kabbalah and the revelations of the mystics or not? You might think, well, after what I just described, no. I wish that were true. Rabbi Yosef Karo, who is the author of the Code of Jewish Law, he was also a profound mystic, an experiencer of the prophetic school. He channeled the living voice of the Shekhinah, the oral Torah, directly. Wrote a whole book about it. Right? It's written, it's translated even in English today. All right? We call it Magid Misharim. All right? They call it the guide or the teacher of righteousness, something like that. Apparently it's out of print and available copies are exorbitantly expensive, but maybe someday it'll be back. But anyway, he wrote in a commentary to the famous law code called the Arba Turim, which is, he wrote his commentary called the Beit Yosef, the House of Joseph. And a question was asked with regards to a specific practice of observance in the synagogue. How do we do it? And the majority opinions of the rabbis were one thing, but the Zohar came and said something against the majority opinion of the rabbis. And Rabbi Yosef Karo, Orach Chaim Kuf Mem Aleph, wrote very clearly, anything that's not written black and white in the Talmud, that it says this is the way it's supposed to be, even if all the later opinion of rabbis say one thing, if the Zohar says something else, we're going to follow the Zohar. And Rabbi Yosef Karo, I should say, was the one who elevated the Zohar to be like the third book of importance in Judaism, next to the Bibles and the Talmud. Now, that was the opinion of Rabbi Karo, even though in all due respect that he said that he didn't live up to it. Many of the laws in the Code of Jewish Law don't follow the Zohar, in spite of what he himself said. But many of the Kabbalistic practices that are observed today came because of Rabbi Karo's influence. But a contemporary of Rabbi Karo was a rabbi in Europe named Rabbi Moshe Isserles. Rabbi Moshe was a profound scholar, leader of the Ashkenazi Jewish community, as Rabbi Karo was the Sephardic. And when Rabbi Karo published his Code of Jewish Law, which he called the Shulchan Aruch, the Set Table, which was a summary of the laws that he wrote in his big Beit Yosef commentary. Well, Rabbi Isserles said, something, Rabbi Karo, great scholars, he has left out all the Ashkenazi customs that we observe in the Ashkenazim, and therefore I'm going to write a book called the Tablecloth that you're going to put on the table. And these became the additions to the Code of Jewish Law, which today are written together in the Code of Jewish Law to this day. Now, Rabbi Isserles also wrote a commentary to the Beit Yosef. And on that one section where Rabbi Karo says we follow the Zohar, and all, God bless Rabbi Isserles, probably blew a gasket. He says, oh, no, we don't. No. The Zohar is just one of the later opinions of the rabbis, and we follow it as an opinion, but not as an authority. Now that's important, because here's the deal. Here's the question. Is the Zohar the historical work of the 2nd century sage Shimon ben Yochai? Or is it just an allegorical midrashic story? Rabbi Karo would probably say it was historical. Rabbi Isserles would probably say it's allegorical. That makes all the difference in the world whether it's historicity or not. Because when it comes now to the practice and observance of law, is what the Zohar says relevant or not? And this is going to help you understand where in Judaism today you have a variance of different opinions of practice and observance. Now, to this day, in the Sephardic communities, over the last 100 to 150 years, ballpark, you have had great rabbis, Sephardic rabbis, who came out of mostly Baghdad. I'm talking about rabbis like Yosef Chaim, the famous Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yaakov Sofer, the famous Kaf HaChaim. These rabbis were master Kabbalists, and they believed every word of the mystical Kabbalah of the Ariel had to be taken as law. And their law codes are specifically prescribed in accordance to the Kabbalah of the Ariel. And for many, many decades, the Sephardic traditions out of Baghdad, which then permeated in the land of Israel with the establishment of the state in 1948, predominantly Kabbalaized Sephardic law. Now, along came an upstart, a young, profound rabbinic scholar coming also out of Baghdad, but at the young age, in his early 20s, said, no. We don't follow all of this Kabbalah stuff. We have to get back to the black and white nitty-gritty of what the law states. And this little upstart later became a chief rabbi, eventually the chief rabbi of Israel, a very profound and great scholar. Some say at the level of Yosef Karo himself. And I speak of Rabbi Obadiah Yosef. Obadiah Yosef, of course, was the founder of the Shas party. We're not going to get into politics, but profound scholar. And he de-Kabbalaized Jewish law for the Sephardim. So to this day, depending on which Sephardic community you will be a part of, you will see there are those who are Kabbalistic according to the Ben Ish Chai and the Kaf HaChaim, and those who are rationalist according to Rabbi Obadiah Yosef. And if you look to our rabbis were all great mystics. They all experienced the greater realms. Many people want to reinvent our rabbis in modern imagery, to say they were rationalists in the modern way. And it's that modern way that gets us into trouble. Because if you look at the rabbis, as we have numerous records of their teachings in the Talmud and elsewhere, our rabbis very clearly interacted with the spiritual realms. They knew all about the malachim, the angels. They knew all about the shadim, demons. They knew all about spirits, and they interacted with these entities on a regular basis. Today, since the, in quote, Enlightenment in the late 1800s, we're in which for lack of a better word, a poisonous idea. And this brings us back to the Ohel Moed, because this is the idea of Rabbi Yosef Menachem, our author here. He warns against what he called philosophy as being a danger against Judaism. Why? Well, because if you're of the opinion, kind of like Spinoza, wherein which the only thing that you will accept as vital and real is that which you can bring valid proofs of it being legitimate. Well, where do you draw that line? Well, the rabbis, in accordance to the Enlightenment philosophies of late Europe, pretty much were very, in quote, anti-mystical. And any kind of experience in the spiritual realm was discounted as not only having any kind of validity personally, it was even considered crazy and nuts. And this permeates in our society to this very day. Many people today, we have an experiential, spiritual, philosophy out in the world today, where in which people look to things like astrology and channeling. You have all these things popular in what's popularized by what we call the New Age movement. Okay, how valid and legitimate is that? Well, if you listen to all these in-quote channelers, all right, this one is talking in the name of the ancient Atlantean warlord, and the other one is talking from the alien from outer space. Okay, how many of them have taught us time warp travel? How many of them have brought the cure of to cancer, or COVID-19 for that matter? How many of them have actually brought us real and significant revelation? The answer, none. So then what is the value of all of these types of ideas? They're beliefs, and people believe them. If it helps to make an individual's life better, right, knock yourself out. But when we're dealing with the real world, what is the definition of reality? You cannot and must not say that seeing is believing and that there is nothing more to reality than that, because that's just not true. When you have your internal experience, you darn well know there's something real going on there. And this brings us into the realm of archetypal psychology, Carl Jung and the like, and taking us all the way back to the beginning, to the ways of the biblical prophets and the prophetic Kabbalah. You see, the way and path of the biblical prophetic Kabbalah, surprisingly, was both rational and mystical, both at the same time. Because having a nebulous or unclear revelation was kind of like worthless. Indeed, with regards to dreams, the rabbis had said, Gemara, that a dream uninterpreted is like a letter that's not read. The danger of unqualified mysticism can lead people to ego aggrandizement, thoughts of like really weirdness, and causing them to get in all kinds of political violence and craziness, the likes of which we still see happening today. And unfortunately, it's motivating tremendous upheavals in our political, economic, and social realms. This is where a lot of modern terrorism is coming from. You might have heard of the original ancient group called the Hashishin, where the word assassin comes from. They were all spiritually motivated. Many of the modern terrorists today are the same. So, b'mufla mimcha al titrosh. That which is above you, don't go after. Because unless you're able to deal with it realistically, properly, and rationally, then you're going to misinterpret. And that is where our, in quote, New Age movements are at today, where everybody is seeking some kind of a spiritual experience. Some are going through narcotics and other things, and they are having experiences, guaranteed. But what is the nature of those experiences? What do they really mean? That is something that needs to be interpreted. So, our rabbi here warns us, and he gives us a quote with regards to the Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah, as we know, and I've taught this in the Sefer Yetzirah class available online, Hevin b'chokhmah v'hacham b'bina. Understand with wisdom and be wise with understanding. And I've written about this in many places. We talk about meditation, what we call in Hebrew, sechel tinuda, oscillating consciousness, which is actually a rather practical function, wherein which, instead of looking for a mystical experience, you start with a rational point of view, and then you seek to internalize it. And as you do and have personal revelation and insight, then you pause, sit back, and think about what that really means. And as you're thinking, rationally analyzing things, going deeper and deeper and deeper into thought, that intuitive psychic taps in again, boom, gives you that revelation, that eureka moment. You got to think about it again. So you're going from rational to intuitive, intuitive to rational, forward and back and forth. Now, this is ingrained as a foundation in Judaism. And this is what, again, our Torah, our Talmud, I should say, makes it so, our Talmud so vital. Because if any of you have ever studied Talmud, I have Talmud classes online for those of you who want to learn Talmud in this way. For those of you who ever read Talmud, go online. Go Google Talmud page, and you'll see from all the different translations that are out there, and that's the one thing ArtScroll really did well, was their Talmud in English. You're going into this picayune discussion of picking apart verses and law, and it's very dry and very tedious, and then all of a sudden, you're like flying into this metaphysical story, these allegories, these teachings. You're going from what we call Pshat to Midrash, and Midrash back to Pshat. You're going into what we call Agadata, stories. And every page of Talmud just merges these two together. Now remember something. The Talmud is an edited text. All right? It wasn't just like written all down like that. The rabbis had to come put the stuff together. And they put it together like this so that you had to go from a rational intellectual side to the mystical intuitive side all at the same time. Boom, boom. Like a heartbeat going back and forth. Like the yin, like the yang, like the wave going up and down. This is what makes Torah alive. So you see, in the great war, and that's what's being fought today, of rationalism versus mysticism. Our society wants to discount anything mystical and says you be rational and you lock in reality. And therefore you can imprison people in said reality. That's not the Torah way. The Torah way encourages you to have experiential or mystical experiences. But, big but, Okay? It's got to be balanced. It's got to be in its place. External reality is real to a point. Internal reality is real, equally real, but to a point. And you got to get the balance between the two so that you can have the harmony and the completion of the mind. Right brain, left brain, Chokhmah, Bina, rationalism, mysticism. They both have their vital, essential places. And each needs to be respected in like kind. And, in all due respect, that's exactly what we teach here at our KosherTorah school. And I'm going to be the first to tell you right now in conclusion. When it comes to rational discussions of things that we are endeavoring to prove, remember our proof texts are only as valuable, or I should say as valid, as those who want to embrace and believe them. So, when you're dealing with any text, you can deal with the same text, and you're going to have people come to that same text and interpret it in radically different ways. And who's right? You see, this is where Judaism big time differs from Christianity. Christianity is always looking for the right belief. Judaism recognizes, tree of knowledge, good and evil stuff, no one has right beliefs. So we all have various beliefs. Do you know which school is right? Lubavitch or Breslov? Or for that matter, the Gaon of Vilna? Which one? Which one is true Judaism? They're all true Judaism. Which way do we observe the law of waiting between meat and dairy? 6 hours? 4 hours? 3 hours? 1. All opinions are right, all depending on circumstance. So, does God exist? You know something? I can't prove that to you objectively in a rational world. I can give you arguments. But I can't even think of counter-arguments to my own arguments. What do you think of that? But I know my personal experiences, my own personal mysticism. I've written about my dreams and my visions. I put in Walking in the Fire. I put in all my books. All those stories, I promise you, they're all real. But, from that rational point of view, if someone says, it's all in your head, don't you? Maybe. And maybe not. And that's where I leave it. So, you're of the opinion, it's not real, or it is real. I'm of both opinions. I embrace the rational, and I embrace the mystical. And I embrace the halakha of the Kabbalist, and I embrace the halakha of the rationalist. And I embrace the internal reality, and I embrace the external reality. And I confess to you, in conclusion, what's real? Only God knows. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not God. Okay? No. I know what's real for me. And I encourage you to discover what's real for you. If you are Torah observant Jew, I can very easily guide you in the proper path of Jewish ritual observance, if you're so inclined. If you're not a question, not a concern. But take this to bear now, where our world is trying to enslave our minds, to tell us what to believe and not to believe. You have to be more pliant, more fluid, and not fall for those deceptions or delusions. No one has the answers today, despite whatever arrogant ones out there want to say, we know this and we know that. No, you don't. The one great truth about science is that it will never ever end with a period or an exclamation mark. It will always end with a comma, with the words to be continued. The rationalist world is on the way to the mystical and the mystical to the rational. And when the two meet, then we'll have a complete mind. And then maybe Mashiach can come. Take that to note. Rationalism, mysticism, great war, let's have great peace. Ariel Bar Tzadok here, KosherTorah School, wishing you shalom, meaning completion of both sides. Talk to you all soon. Shalom.